Mitch. So if you want to come back, because I'm sure each one of the speakers had points that you wanted to respond to. Welcome, TJump.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Thank you very much for joining us. You have your YouTube channel as well, as I can see, and a very nice mic setup, I would say.
Thank you.
So, what's your question today?
Oh yeah, so I'm an atheist, by which I mean I believe there are no reasons to believe in the existence of God. To me, all of the arguments and evidence seem like God of the gaps. Like essentially it's something we don't know and you've made up an answer to it. Like you guys bring up the point that atheism can't justify morality or rationality or meaning and purpose and those kinds of things. Well, that's not exactly true. Like we can make up answers just like we think theists do. The reason we don't is because just making up answers isn't evidence. So just as theists can say, well, all of these things are grounded in a God, we could say it's grounded in naturalistic pantheism, which is an eternal, all-powerful nature, which is not conscious. So it's not like a God. It's not like theism. And we can say that rationality and morality are just undiscovered laws of nature. So atheists can account for rationality and morality and meaning and purpose with even better made up answers than what we think theists do. But the reason we don't supply those answers is because there's no actual evidence to support that. So when you keep saying that, well, atheists can't account for X, like rationality, well, that's not exactly true. Like morality specifically, we know that most philosophers are moral realists. They believe in objective morality, even though about 15% are theists. So most atheist philosophers also believe in moral realism and can account for morality without a God. But the reason we don't is because there's no actual evidence to support one of these alternatives over the other. So we just admit we don't know, and we're just going to be happy with we don't know. And that's a rational position. It's rational to say, right now we don't know, and we're just going to stop there. We don't need to try to account for all these things or make up accounts, even though we could.
Excellent. Thank you so much, TJump. Just to summarize, what TJump is basically asking is about meaning, morality, and rationality can be justified or explained under atheism, but it's also something which is he acknowledges. I'm guessing you mean it's not. Well, actually, I don't put words in your mouth. Maybe you can clarify when the speaker speaks. So, Imran, why don't you start us off on meaning?
Yeah. So look, I think as a general point first, saying you can provide an account, but you don't acknowledge it or you don't provide an account for it. The main question is, do you live by these things? Because remember, we live real lives, right? So to dismiss morality and meaning and saying we can make it up, but we don't because we don't have evidence for it. It sounds good, from a purely rational discourse perspective. But in real life, how do you live? Do you live with virtue? Do you live, practicing morality? Do you live with meaning? That's what I'm interested in. Do you live by these things? And if you do, how do you account for these things on atheism and naturalism in the absence of God? That's the key here. Because for me, it's all about the practical, real life. It's about the real life practicality of this whole thing. There's a level of, we can have that rational discourse. Okay, sounds good. Okay, you can account for it, but you don't because you don't have evidence from your perspective, etc. But when you live your lives, how do you live? Do you live acknowledging that there is good and bad, right and wrong? Do you live acknowledging that there is meaning to your life? And if you do, how do you account for them? That's what I'd really like to know.
Excellent. So TJump, you'll get a chance to hopefully respond to that if we have enough time. Hamza, your thoughts either on rationality or morality or meaning, or which one you want to choose, or all of them?
Yeah, I mean, look, this whole setup is slightly a little bit problematic because you can't flesh out these ideas with someone in a deep and meaningful way. And I'm not saying this to be self-defeating here, but I'm saying it is not conducive to fleshing these things out, right? So, look, let's talk about morality, for example, to reference the majority of philosophers, that a lot of the moral philosophers are moral realists, and therefore we can find a naturalistic account for morals being objective and independent. That's not necessarily an argument. That's a form of an argument from an authority, which can be a logical fallacy, and it could also be seen as an argument from popularity, just because lots of people do it, therefore it must be true. We have to zoom in on these ideas. So if we mean by moral realism that morals are mind independent, okay, that they're not based on an individual perspective, they need some kind of grounding. This is meta ethics, moral ontology. So you need to explain their objectivity, meaning explain that they are mind independent, and you need to explain where they came from. Now, philosophical naturalism has a huge problem. Not only this, atheists who adopt the Darwinian mechanism to explain what makes us human and therefore explains our sense of morality have They cannot explain objective morals. For example, a recent piece of research in 2020 called Evolutionary Moral Realism has tried to justify moral values, objective moral values, by grounding them in deep biological structures. So they're not philosophically necessary, they're biologically necessary, in deep biological structures that are based on cooperative environments that give rise to species that are intelligent and social. The problem with this here is it creates a massive problem for things like truth being a moral value, which undermines the very basis of trying to find out if moral values are objective or not. And that's a massive discussion to have. But the point is, there are very deep and interesting discussions that we should have in modern philosophy, and even, you know, referring to philosophy of biology. But we can't flesh this out right now. But I would say, if someone's made a claim that many moral philosophers are atheists and they believe in moral realism, I would like to say, okay, then show me how that makes sense. And the other thing I want to add is, we're not making God up as an explanation for these things. You could see it the other way around. You could see it as an axiomatic argument, which is, well, given the fact that we are rational, given the fact that there are objective moral values, this means God exists. It's not a God of the gaps per se. It's more of an axiomatic argument, because you could argue in this way: if objective moral values exist, God exists. Objective moral values exist, therefore God exists. So it's not a God of the gaps argument. It's an axiomatic argument, which, you know, I would say it's not necessarily the position that TJump has mentioned. And, you know, saying that, you know, we could explain rationality with natural laws, I'm not going to let them get away with that. Show me.
Okay, wait.
Just as a question, we need to, when someone says there can be a naturalistic explanation for rationality and morality, and say, oh, we could refer to this natural law, eternal nature kind of thing. Yeah. Let's flesh that out. Let's articulate that, because once you start talking about it, then we'll be able to find out how it's not coherent.
Yeah. So that's what I've been asked by the admin to continue the conversation between you two, because obviously it's the first time you're on here, and also TJump is, of course, a YouTuber who has waited a long time. So just on the topic of rationality, if you can go back and forth, and I'll ask Hijab and Imran to be a little bit, you know, just go comb your rabbit's hair, or just busy. well, let him respond to.
Sure. Sorry.
It's not Trump, it's TJump.
Sorry.
Well, my name is Tom. So yeah, to explain rationality is pretty simple, actually. We know that reality is reality. And the fact that reality is reality gives us the law of identity, A equals A. So we know logic and math are just descriptions of reality. They're like languages. We can use logic and math to describe the way reality is, and that's how we can ground logic and reason. It's just a description of the way reality is.
Yes. I don't disagree with that. I think when we talk about that atheism cannot explain rationality, what we're basically saying is, if you're an atheist that adopts a Darwinian mechanism to explain the evolution of our cognitive faculties, then we can't trust our cognitive faculties. Why? Can I explain that?
Yeah, it's easy. I mean, Darwinian faculties are irrelevant to whether or not we can trust our mind. The fact that we came from like random processes doesn't mean that it's not true that they work. So the fact where we came from is just a genetic fallacy. It doesn't matter where we came from. What matters is do our cognitive faculties work? And to understand if they work, we would test them in reality, not look about where they came from.
No, this is not the genetic fallacy. This is more of, okay, so I adopt the Darwinian mechanism to explain what makes me human, okay? So we want to basically explain our rational faculties, okay? So here's the question. Can we trust our rational faculties under the Darwinian mechanism? That's the question, okay? So if you're an atheist that adopts the Darwinian mechanism, then you need to start talking about these things. This is a question of epistemology. So the original argument used to be, from Quine and others, was, okay, well, it does make sense because natural selection would have selective, truth-reliable cognitive faculties over unreliable cognitive faculties, because they're fitness enhancing. It's conducive to survival and reproduction. Now, there was a bit of a discussion going on, and that discussion continued, and they basically concluded, sorry, that's my rooster, yeah? Basically, they concluded that, okay, there is no necessary link between natural selection and survival and truth, because you can have unreliable cognitive faculties that can produce false beliefs, and you could lead to survival. For example, Professor O'Brien, for example, they come up with these thought experiments. A thought experiment can be, I'm a jungle person, I believe all fungi are poisonous, and as a result, I survive. That's a false belief, because it's not true all fungi are poisonous. White butter mushrooms are very good for you. So then they continue the discussion, then they develop something called evolutionary reliabilism. Now, evolutionary reliabilism is probabilistic. It's basically saying that natural selection, it was far more likely for natural selection to select truth reliable cognitive faculties over unreliable cognitive faculties that produce false beliefs. Now, the whole discussion in the philosophy of biology and epistemology is, well, how can we justify that statement? Is it true? Now, if you not only look at natural selection, but you look at genetic drift, because there are other mechanisms to explain biological change that constrain natural selection in some degree. And if you look into the empirical evidence, then my conclusion is we can't trust our rational faculties.
Right. So again, this is really easy. It's been solved in philosophy for a long time. The argument you're referring to is Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism, the fact that we evolved and the evolution may not have selected for truth and may have selected for survivability instead. It's been solved in philosophy. Like, it's not really a serious issue anymore. It's the fact that evolution can't produce logical contradictions. Like, evolution can't cause you to believe that there's a round square or that 1 + 1 = 7. It's just the fact that because we are limited in reality, our brains evolved in reality, it can't cause us to believe not reality. It's like saying, could evolution cause us to believe a round square? Well, the answer is no. I mean, it's literally impossible for us to imagine a round square because it's something that isn't real. It's like something that's a contradiction in reality. So anything that evolution causes us to believe can't be those kinds of contradictions, which means something about our evolutionary mindset, our rationality, is going to necessarily be true because it's going to be limited by reality. It can't be a contradiction like a round square. And so that things like logic and math are going to be true regardless of how evolution develops at all, because they have to be. It's a logical contradiction for them to be otherwise. And we know that certain parts of our rational faculties don't work. Like, we have a propensity to attribute agency to things that have no agency. Like, if we see a rustle in the grass and we think it's a lion, we run away and survive. And so our brain selects for those kinds of beliefs, which is, I think, the same way that we come to the God belief, is that we like attribute agency to things that don't have agency, like what created rationality, when we don't need to. We can explain rationality pretty simply. It's a feature of reality, and our brains evolved in reality, and evolution can't cause us to believe in contradictions for the same reason reality can't have contradictions.
Well, I don't know how that deals with the argument per se. And also, I would disagree with something that you've postulated there, because there is research in cognitive science that basically says that if you look at evolutionary genetic algorithms and game theory, they come to conclusion that it was probably more likely that natural selection selected our ability not to have true perceptions over true perceptions, right? It was more fitness enhancing. So from that perspective, I would disagree with that postulation. It might make sense conceptually in an abstract philosophical sense, but when you look at the empirical data, there is some kind of justification to show that in actual fact that it was probably more likely that natural selection selected our ability not to see things as they are, right? To see things as they're not, right? So I don't know how that basically fits in with what I've said, and I don't know how that basically undermines the position that I've just articulated, because I'm not really articulating Plantinga's position, because I think he goes too far. For example, in Dean in 2018, one of the most recent papers on evolutionary reliabilism, what he basically discusses is he responds to Stitch and Plantinga, and I agree with Dean's position. I think Stitch and Plantinga, they go too far in undermining evolutionary reliabilism. However, what Dean does say, and you should read the paper, it's a really good paper, he basically makes a concession and says, this doesn't justify evolutionary reliabilism and we need more empirical evidence. Now, we'll go to the empirical evidence. And
sorry, just to cut you off there. I've got TJump's email address. I can set up a discussion with both of you later on. TJump's a YouTuber as well. I'm sure he'll be more than happy, won't you? Sure.
Yeah, for sure. Can I respond for like 10 seconds, because I can answer that.
Sorry, if it's okay, can I just jump from hijab straight to Adam, because I'm going to have to skip hijab giving you a response simply because Adam's been waiting a very long time.
Sure.
Really sorry about that, but I've got your email. I'm going to set up a discussion between both of you. Yeah.
Cool.
But you got 10 seconds.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, the response is that evolution does select for our like biases, fallacies, things that we get wrong, but it can't select for wrong rationality. It can't give us a wrong rationality. It's laws of logic. It can't give us a wrong law of logic.
Yeah. I know you want to respond to that, Hamza, but I'm not going to let you. we could do that another time. Thank you so much, TJump, and we're definitely going to have you again. Adam, welcome to the show. Sorry.
Thank you.
No
worries.
Ask your question and I'll direct it to Mohammed Hijab.
Yeah. All right. So since I'm limited in time, I'm just gonna ask pretty quickly here. I'm curious with regards to the punishment of hellfire of non-believers. God seems to talk about in the Quran that non-believers will like burn for an eternity, and I'm just like wondering how is that justified in a sense? Like how is that fair? I mean, because some people would say that we didn't ask to be created, and therefore being punished for an eternity might not seem as fair for a merciful